Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video by Nerd Kingdom. Today we are going to be following on from the review of Rime of the Frostmaiden that I did last week, and we're going to be taking a look at how to run this new 5th edition adventure. The first thing that I want to mention about this adventure is how great not only the book is, the cover, the map, the artwork in there. I mean, this is an adventure that focuses on a horror-styled campaign, so naturally we're going to be comparing that to things like Curse of Strahd, and I think that this is definitely one of the better adventures that 5th edition has put out. I think this is a really, really good addition to the adventures that we already have for 5th edition. But this book also acts as a campaign setting as well as an adventure. So not only am I going to be giving you some tips on how to run this adventure, but generally if you're interested in the Icewind Dale as a setting, maybe you've read the Legend of Drizzt series and you think that that might be a really cool setting to base your own adventures in, this is really useful for getting an idea and a concept of what that area is like. So it's a really interesting book just for that reason. One useful thing that we have about this adventure, and it really tells us straight from the beginning as a DM how they expect this adventure to run, is we are given an adventure flow chart, and basically this is just a quick rundown through the list of the different story arcs and the different story beats of this adventure. So it's really good to relate back to finding out where you are in the story or where your players are in the story and maybe where they need to go next. So it's really good to keep track of where you are on the adventure flowchart so that you're able to always refer back to what you need to read next. So you don't need to read this entire book in one go. You can always just read the chapter that's coming ahead of the one you're on. So the first 100 pages of this adventure are dedicated to 10 towns, and this is a really interesting section. Again, this is more setting up the campaign setting style of this adventure, because generally this adventure is like open world. Your players can go anywhere, they can start anywhere, and that's quite interesting, but it's also quite daunting. It means that as a DM you need to be kind of familiar with the first 2 chapters of this book, which is 10 towns and the Icewind Dale, especially Icewind Dale, I think, because when your players go exploring the wilderness, you want to be able to quite confidently open to that chapter of the book and be able to run whatever content is in there. So those are 2 chapters that I think you should definitely give a read to. The section on 10 towns is sort of started by this mention that there are 2 main quests to start off your adventure with. I definitely prefer the one where you are hunting a serial killer down. That is, for me, a far, far better starting quest than the others. But every single town has its own starting quest. So this immediately encourages replayability within the adventure, meaning that if you've already played this adventure or you have tried running it before with this group, then you can still have a pretty decent amount of replayability there. And it also encourages exploration because we've got really good descriptions of the 10 towns here, and we've got different quests to basically sprinkle into our adventures at various points. Then it means that we can essentially encourage our players to explore, knowing that there's always some quests to tie them back into the story. Within this first 100 pages as well, where we get the descriptions of the different towns and the different people in the towns, and again, we're letting our players choose that starting quest that's going to begin this whole campaign and adventure. It's worth noting that there are very few magical items, very few places to acquire help and aid within this campaign setting. Loads and loads of people who've already looked at this adventure begin noting how few magical items there are within this, and that is by design. You can completely go against this as a DM, but I think that adds to the horror element, not allowing your players to be as well armed and as well equipped as they would like to be, really begins lending to that horror element that we wish to basically make more intense in this adventure. Chapter 2 is about 70 pages long, and it's dedicated to the Icewind Dale locations. These are basically points of interest on the map that your players may stumble across or may intentionally go. A lot of times they will hear a rumour in the towns, and they will basically try going to one of these locations to find out what's happening there. And some of these are quite challenging fights, especially if your players are early level. So some of these can be absolutely devastating battles, and others can be just fun little roleplay encounters. There's a real variety here, and I think that's by design. The idea is that your players never feel like they are fully prepared for this adventure. They never feel like they are incredibly strong, because the enemies that they will be facing within the Icewind Dale are pretty scary for the level that your players are at. So that's always worth bearing in mind, that and making sure your players are aware that if your party go out into the wilderness unprepared, then they could easily meet their end out there. So just be warned about that. There are some very fun little fights out in the Icewind Dale. One thing that I find this chapter does really well is it encourages room for roleplay, encourages room for homebrew content. It also encourages exploration. So generally, if you have any ideas of your own, for example, you may have read some articles or maybe designed a few encounters based around these wilderness, winter, wasteland style battles, then these are all perfect to sprinkle in. I almost find that chapter 2, where it mentions about the Icewind Dale locations, I almost find that this is sort of almost like a bare bones. Like, at minimum, you should include these things, but any good DM knows you want to sprinkle in your own things, your own unique flavours. The first real chapter of this adventure that I feel kind of directly ties in with the main story is where we get told about Sunblight. It's essentially a dungeon delve with a pretty fun boss fight at the end. The adventures are designed to win this boss fight. Nothing in this seems so overpowered at the point that they should be going into this fight. Obviously, you can be really cruel and have them going into this fight at a way lower level than it recommends. You can be really nice and have them going into this fight at a much higher level than the adventure recommends. But when your adventures go through Sunblight, basically this is what I felt was the first time that the adventure began to get railroaded. So bear that in mind. I feel like it kind of pushes the adventurers down this route. And again, it's a dungeon delve. It's pretty interesting. I quite like the encounter as described, and I quite like the enemy in there. I'm going to try not to give too many spoilers away here, because I want you guys to read the book still, but generally I thought that this was a fun little encounter and one that really ties in with everything. However, Sunblight is directly followed on by Destruction Light, and man, I mean, I felt like this chapter was really interesting. It was one of my favourites throughout the entire book. Firstly, we have a brilliant, really interesting, unique boss monster. Secondly, your players find out that their actions have consequences. Essentially, the gist of this chapter, Destruction Light, is that they've gone to Sunblight in order to stop this, I'm going to call it a dragon, because calling it a construct just doesn't really feel right. They're there to stop this dragon from basically destroying 10 towns, and they realise they get to Sunblight too late. Now, if your players really don't want to go to Sunblight, don't have them go to Sunblight. Maybe they're just chilling out in Bryn Shander or one of the other 10 towns, and all of a sudden, this dragon-like creature just flies overhead and begins destroying the town. That is equally great. They realise that maybe if they'd gone to Sunblight and stopped this earlier, they could have stopped it. So, again, I don't feel like Sunblight is an essential chapter of the book to run, but Destruction Light is. It is brilliant. And again, your players realise that they have the opportunity to fail here. They may not be strong enough, they may not be prepared enough to defeat this dragon-like creature. And that is great. Allowing your players the opportunity to fail, the opportunity to run away, gives them motivation. All of a sudden, you know, 2 of the towns are completely ruined before this dragon is slain by town guards, and your players realize that, oh, if we'd gone to this place and done this thing, maybe we could have stopped it, maybe we could have done more. That's a really good motivator, and it gets your party invested in the main story that this book is trying to tell. So the next section of the book that this goes into is called Aurel's Abode, or as I like to call it, slaying a god or killing a big bird. Because I felt like Aurel's Abode was, again, another dungeon crawl, which I don't hate, but I felt like at this point, Aurel hasn't played enough of a part. This is the section of the book that Aurel, who is on the front cover, is really meant to, like, come into her own. It really irked me that Aurel's biggest role in this adventure was in this one chapter of the book. Like, they dedicated the whole cover art to her, or one of her 3 forms. She has this really awesome ability that when she's defeated, she gets stronger and adapts to a new form, really taking on the idea of this mythic system that they've developed. And yet, she's only really seen in one chapter of this adventure, and I think that's such a waste of a great antagonist here. So, my recommendation would be, have Aurel be a big player up until this point. Have her make appearances in the Icewind Dale. Have her attack the party. Have her attempt to drag one of the unconscious party members back to her lair. Something like that. That is such a great motivator for the rest of the group. So yeah, I recommend using Aurel more in the adventure leading up to this chapter. That way, when the party realise they have to go to her lair, they have to go to this one place that she's guaranteed to be, it's going to be a scary time. It's going to really add to the horror element on that. Now, your party don't have to fight and kill Aurel. The game has put in a nice little clause in there that allow the party to essentially win the fight by killing a rock, which is a giant bird that Aurel has. I feel like tying Aurel into the rest of the story a lot more is like a really good tip to make this adventure much more interesting and much more intense. I mean, this running through Aurel's Abode could very well be like going to Castle Ravenloft, where you know Strahd is somewhere in this castle, and the next door you open could result in you finding this creature that has killed you so many times up until this point, that has rendered your party unconscious on multiple occasions, has ruined your day just because it's fun for them. But it doesn't feel like that in this adventure. You know that there's a powerful entity here, you know that there's a so-called god here, but you don't really know the power of it, you don't really know what it's capable of, and as such, it loses that horror element. So I recommend, 100% I recommend, when you run this dungeon crawl, when you run Aurel's Abode, have her be a more prevalent factor in the steps leading up to it. Once your party have the Rime of the Frostmaiden from Aurel's Abode, they can head to the Caves of Hunger. Now, I really liked the Caves of Hunger chapter. I think a lot of people think from some of my other talks and other reviews and how to run videos that I don't like dungeon crawls. And I don't like dungeon crawls that are just thrown in to add playtime. I really like the Caves of Hunger because it actually feels like it should be there. There's some really cool things in this giant cave system, and this is a huge dungeon. This is big, it is massive, and it's brilliant. It'll probably take you a full, I would say maybe 3 sessions to run through all of this if your party are a little bit more powerful than they should be. If your party just want to get from one end to the other, you can railroad them through this, but this is really meant to be an exploration. It's a huge dungeon. There's like hauntings going on here, so there's really cool roleplay opportunity. There's also, and I think this is the coolest thing, there's something trapped in the ice in Area 31, which just leads on to this whole Lovecraftian style adventure that I love. I mean, think of the horror elements there. So this is a really great chapter, and I really enjoyed reading through this, and I really enjoyed running some of these encounters too. These were a lot of fun to play through. The final chapter of this book is called The Doom of Ithrin. And the Doom of Ithrin is, again, it's one of those interesting encounters that I feel like a lot of people are going to have mixed opinions on. Generally, there's this hidden ancient city beneath this frozen glacier, and it is overrun with Nothics. Now, Nothics are a super cool enemy. The lore related to Nothics are fab. What I recommend is, if you don't want to run just the same old basic Nothic, maybe check out on DM's Guild. There is a product called Monster Manual Expanded, and it's one of the top rated products on there. I'll put a link in the description too, and that has some variations of Nothics in there, so you can have different types of Nothics showing up if you want to really make this interesting. And basically, they're encouraged to explore this city. Now, if your party did not kill Auril, then she is going to make another appearance within the Doom of Ithrin, because Auril is going to hunt the party into this glacier and into this ruined city. Not to mention, inside this city, there is also a demi-lich just chilling out. So, not only will Auril, if she's alive, hunt the party here, not only is the city filled with ancient things that could kill your party and a bunch of Nothics, but there's also a demi-lich just chilling out. So really watch out, because this adventure is this section of the adventure could easily kill a party off. So be really careful with this. It's quite terrifying. Now, I actually saw a recommendation from somebody in a Facebook chat, and I'll actually put the post up there for you guys to read. But what they suggest doing, and I love this idea, what they suggest is that an eldritch being is trapped in the Regid Glacier, and that Auril, knowing that this eldritch being is trapped inside the glacier, is trying to stop anyone from going inside it. That gives Auril motivation to stop the players. It also means that it's not a cut and dry. Auril's not necessarily a bad individual. She is trying to stop the party from accidentally releasing this eldritch creature that could easily ruin things for everybody. So that's a pretty interesting idea that you guys could adapt and adopt to put into this chapter. I think it adds a lot more motivation and a lot more conflicting interests to the adventure, and I think it's a pretty good addition to make. It also kind of ties in with the idea of, you know, in Area 31 of the Caves of Hunger, there being this thing in the ice. So I think it ties in with a lot of the different aspects of the lore there. And again, sort of makes it almost so that your party are unwillingly and unknowingly going to release this terrible thing unless they're stopped. So that's a really interesting twist on the adventure that I really like. It recommends different endings towards the prologue of the book. And one of the best endings, in my opinion, is that they activate the obelisk of Ithrin with a staff of power, and they end up resetting time, or travelling back in time, to minus 343 DR. Now, I think that's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful idea, because what you can do is that is a great opportunity for you as a DM to just go, hey, you did this and that. You know, you can run with a homebrew adventure after that point, and it would be wonderful. It would be really weird and different and interesting, and it could be just fantastic. But I also think what you could also do is you could have your players trying to work their way back, or realizing that they've released this eldritch being and they need to now find a way back to stop their past selves from releasing it. That could be a really weird but fun, like, conclusion to this adventure that you could easily homebrew and put into the end of this game. Alternatively, what a great place to end this adventure, when your party just all of a sudden reverse time and end up, you know, in the year minus 343. That's a great little conclusion. I think that's a fantastic way of ending an adventure like this. Very, very on point from Wizards of the Coast. Well, guys, that is the end of this video. There are only really a few things that I recommended changing in this. I felt like generally this was a really, really well written book. There are numerous and fantastic role-play encounters presented. There are fantastic dungeon crawls in here. What I recommend really is maybe implementing Oral in earlier parts of the adventure, have her show up earlier and be a bigger factor. And then I recommend maybe having it so that there is an eldritch being trapped within Ithrin. And that, again, adds a bit more moral ambiguity to the adventure. It also gives Oral more of a motivation than she would normally have. So all of that sort of stuff, I think, would really flesh out and enrich the adventure for you guys. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Have a great day.